Okay. Ugh. Not that relevant, that legible, but the idea is that if we have compound claim, yeah, well, actually what's probably more useful to show, let me, oh, that means, not that one, I think it's this one, yes. Here I was working with formula, conjunction, and relevant, and a kind of relevant whether to say whether it supports or opposes, which I don't think Stephen liked. Maybe we should bring back your structure, Stephen, also. But I'm saying it doesn't matter. All we need are relevant claims, and since a relevant claim can also be a compound, we can suppose they're all supporting. So in a way, yeah, it is what we had before. So in a way, it's not new.
But I'm really, what are we discussing right now?
We're discussing the difference between base level and higher level. And we said we could hide.
I would say that the main thing where we seem to disagree still is the purpose of a base layer versus that's what I got out of the Hangouts chat the other day. I mean, I have a clearly defined purpose for a base layer, whereas Timothy contradicted that purpose. So in essence, we're talking past each other, because when I say base layer, I'm saying not just something that all systems can use. For me, the base layer, the main purpose is centralizing disagreements. The way you do that is around atomic claims. And that's why I find that compound formalizations and even higher level formalizations don't fit in there, because in my feeling of how I see that evolve, that would not centralize this agreement. It would separate it again in differing, contradicting formalizations. Now, okay, that's with my definition of base layer. Timothy's definition, what I said yesterday, is something more like the common thing we can all agree on for argument mapping. And yeah, then the question is, what do you agree on? So I'm more interested in what is the purpose of the base layer? Where do we draw the line, and how do you decide where to draw the line before even going into compounds?
Yeah. Well. Okay. I am certainly. I see the point of centralizing disagreement. I do not think that working only with atomic claims is the best way to do that. So we have a disagreement of the articulation between the.
Yeah, but then you're assuming we're at least agreeing on what a base layer should do. But then before we move on, we need to check in with everyone whether everyone is on board with that being the functionality of a base layer or not. Otherwise, again, we're talking.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, you're saying base layer should be about centralizing disagreement. Hence, it should do this. And I'm saying no. These are just like we have to.
Yeah, but we can move on the discussion once we agree that.
Yeah. So I'm agreeing with
saying I think it's unlikely that we all agree that is a purpose of a base layer.
What I retain from our conversation is that there is a separate discussion about what are the relevant arguments and how they're organized, and that separating that in different layers can help factor out the conversation, so to speak. And I agreed with that. So I'm totally on board with separating those two. Centralizing disagreement could be a way of expressing that, but I'm not sure we agree on all the specifics there. I still believe that compounds are essential even to that first goal, but that's something.
I mean, I think to some degree.
Go ahead.
Centralizing. What is the centralizing?
Disagreement.
Disagreement
yeah,
is
for me it means
a loose term.
Well, it's not for me. It is concretely showing what is it in relation to this claim that most people agree on, and what is it they disagree on. That's what for me.
So I would say it. But then you actually mean more than that, right? It sounds good, but like taking that as a definition, I would say it's enough just to have supports of claims. You don't need supports of arguments, because people are disagreeing. You just list the points that people are making on either side, and you're done. But you want to capture more of that disagreement, and the ways you can disagree with those disagreements can get pretty complex. And so, part of it is like your definition of atomic claim. I mapped out it using my diagrams, right? Last night, I tried to do the SARS-CoV-2 virus was created as a bioweapon by the Chinese. And well, it's a compound claim, right? It's that the Chinese intentionally released the SARS-CoV-2 as a bioweapon, right? So
I don't get the point.
What is the atomic claim? What is the atomic, what do you as atomic claims in this?
In what? The last thing you just said?
Yeah, the Chinese released SARS-CoV-2 as a bioweapon.
Yeah, that's for me an atomic claim.
Except that it can be broken up because they developed SARS-CoV-2 as part of that. They developed it intentionally as a bioweapon, as a separate claim. They developed it intentionally as a bioweapon. They released it intentionally as a separate claim. They released it by accident as an opposing, mutually exclusive claim. But so, how complex
what is it? Okay, let's put it
atomic
this
claim
way.
get?
How easy is it from a user perspective to write a negation? Or imagine what the negation is. I would almost put it like that.
You couldn't really write a single negation for that one.
You can, you
right?
just add not in that sentence and you're done. And it makes sense.
Not, well, okay, then you're disagreeing with multiple claims at the same time.
Exactly.
You say that thing is false.
But there's no problem. That's why the debate moves to the underlying supporting.
Okay, I went to Japan when I was in college, and Marc-Antoine lives in Canada. Is true. I can write a not for that. What I just said is false. That's not, therefore it's an atomic claim.
It is, but it's not as easily parsable. It's not using common language.
Okay,
Yeah,
now
once
you're
again-
using sort of, your definition of atomic claims has to do with how easy it is stated in English, I guess. That's what I'm
but
saying.
how
is it's
commonly
not
you
clear to
would
me,
raise it in an argument, I would argue. Like how common would you say because of A, B? Like how reusable is it? How likely is it that you would use it as a premise?
Okay, so what you're talking about are heuristics, right? Your definition of the base layer and atomic claim is based on heuristics. It's not a clear definition. It's,
well, if it's
touchy, it's a feely thing.
No, actually, it's exactly that. If you use it as a premise, then it makes sense that it's atomic. If it's not a single premise but multiple premises as part of what you call compound claims, then I'm just suggesting the base layer just to decompose it as two separate premises supporting a conclusion, because that's how you centralize all these different premises, which in one way or another contribute to the conclusion, and you can still store the compound on a layer 2. The point is, if you have many different competing compounds, all using the same or different premises, you can just filter out all the premises and place them side by side. That certainly works. There's no problem with that. But my question is, what's the benefit of on a layer 2 displaying all these different arguments side by side if that were to be the base layer?
One thing I liked at some point, I disagree, Stephen, but one thing I liked about what you said at some point is that in the base layer, we can display logic as language, right? And so, and the formalization can be a further layer.
Yeah, and that's an epistemological argument that all disagreement fundamentally boils down to being expressed in language. You want to support that. Hence, the base layer needs to be founded in natural language.
So for me, the fact that Tim's original statement, which I think is a perfectly good example, the Chinese released the virus as a bioweapon, can be mapped to, for me, that's a compound claim, or it's a claim that can be taken atomically or can be decomposed as a compound claim. And Jamie's writing.
Yeah, maybe we need to give James some time in a bit.
Yeah, that's really interesting, I think, what she's saying there. But I think that the basic idea that interpretation is how we break down a complex claim into more atomic. And for me, atomic is not an absolute, it's It's a more atomic than something which is then revealed to be a compound by the operation of interpretation, decomposition. And that means the distinction when you said, oh, it's true or false, hence it's atomic. No. It's true or false, hence it's a claim. Anything that's a claim can be true or false, whether compound or atomic. And we can argue for the truth or falsehood of a compound or atomic, because again, that's a role in the relative decomposition interpretation, which can be even layer one, because we can do it informally as language. This claim actually means blah, 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 make it a point list, make it and whatever you want. But it can be a purely linguistic operation where you're decomposing a complex compound into its components.
See, I don't disagree that it's a claim. I don't disagree you can. I'm saying that for centralizing disagreement, it's countering the point of having a nice overview of all the different points people agree on and disagree on. And by the way, yeah, what's the difference between a compound claim then? How do you decide whether you model as a compound claim or as a supporting claim? I mean, or as that's part of the whole problem. How do you model it? How do you decide? Because all of a sudden, like something, what was the exact claim again, Timothy? The
Chinese released the SARS virus as a bioweapon.
And that's something that endlessly bothered me, is that you often use support as a way to do compounds. And that's something I've always
centralize disagreements. I know. But
it's and that
what I'm saying is
that it's part of an argument. That assumes it's part of an argument. And I'm saying the compound can have a truth value independently of being part of an argument. Over.
And I don't even think I'm disagreeing there. It has, yeah.
Okay, I'm curious about Jamie's.
Well, Jamie talked about mutually exclusive claims, right? And it goes back to what we did last time, I think, when we were talking about mutually exclusive claims, where they can be composed. In fact, I have an example of exactly this case today that I was playing with. But you know, you have a hierarchy of mutually exclusive claims, but when you flatten it out, you know, the Chinese released it as a. It means putting them all together into a single claim, the full compound claim, right? The Chinese released it as a bioweapon. It is mutually exclusive with the U.S. released it intentionally in China. Is mutually exclusive with it was a natural phenomenon. It's mutually exclusive. But if you break it down into its hierarchies, there's one set of mutually exclusive claims, which is it's natural versus it was created by humans. And then there's mutual exclusion where it was created by humans as a bioweapon versus it was created by humans for science, which is still mutually exclusive with it happened in nature. And then at another level, you have it was released intentionally versus released by accident versus it wasn't released at all.
But so
yeah, it's a feature lattice.
Yeah, all of this can be modeled. Again, that's not the argument. The argument is whether or not it goes in a layer 2 or in a base layer.
I'm saying
well, no, the one open question is there a clear line between what is an atomic claim and what isn't? That's the one open question here.
Nope.
It is a very valid question. Ironically enough, from a practical perspective, yes. I mean, if something can easily be split into 2 separate claims, yes. If something makes sense on its own, you can just as easily break it down by adding supporting and opposing arguments against the atomic claim, right? That's part of the discussion. I don't think you can really agree on at some point. Your entire claim is the entire argument, and again, you have the full text description. And
implicit premises are part of that. Jamie?
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I mean, I disagree with that, Stephen, because that, by my observation, is how a lot of irrelevant arguments get introduced. That's where a lot of debates go sideways, and it loses its structure and organization, because people start like arguing against one part. They don't recognize like the whole compoundness of the claim and argument itself. And so
can I emphasize at this point, though, that a base layer's purpose is not to represent arguments in their best form. A base layer's purpose is to centralize this agreement. They're two different things for me. Layer 2 would be doing exactly what you're doing, Jamie. You're taking the arguments in their best form, curating them, centralizing them, and maybe even letting them compete against one another. The question is, you are doing that. Somebody else writes an article and uploads data to a central argument database. My question is, how can you have all these different inputs of people bring forth their best arguments, reusing the same premises, and how do you centralize all this data? That's what I'm arguing.
Let me ask you a question about. Let me ask you a question about your definition of centralize. In this case of the bioweapon, right? Yeah, it can be stated as a single understandable sentence, and people can argue yes and no against that, right? And yet you could extract part of that debate to say, you know, no, it wasn't developed in the lab. Yes, it was developed in the lab.
You can.
Okay, but so if you have that debate, now are you centralizing debate if you're making those arguments in two different places? But you're making that argument in the place where it was released as a bioweapon, and you're making an argument again in the more atomic claim of it was developed by humans.
Can you draw this? Because I'm not certain I see where the duplication comes in here.
Okay, here, I'll give a simpler version of, because when I tried to map it out.
While Tim is working on that, can I just say quickly, Stephen, that maybe like practically speaking, in order to accomplish like this is a crowdsourcing project, as opposed to like skilled curators, maybe there's some kind of script that could be written, because I imagine there's certain patterns which would linguistically, which would signify that something is a compound claim, something like that, or which, or when Chinese is kind of used as like a descriptive noun, or certain adjectives are implied.
Yeah.
And maybe there's something that could say like, hey, like just here's a notification. This is more complex and compound, so you need to be explicit about what you're arguing against. Or maybe there's even a feature that encourages people to break up long form statements into their unique claims. And there can just be a link to how to do that, like our making arguments document.
Yeah, I mean, definitely all of that is possible, but it doesn't really resolve whether or not it's useful to have a base layer that only has the atomic claims.
Well, what I'm saying is atomic claim is a temporary status. It's atomic until it's been decomposed, or until implicit claims have been identified, because that's another reason why a claim is changes its nature. So you realize, oh, it's actually carrying presuppositions, assumptions, implicit assumptions, and then actually the implicit assumption is part of the end of that initially.
Yeah, but not everyone agrees with that implicit assumption. If
that, and there you're right.
That's why it's still atomic in the sense of that word of atomic. And then another claim that does include that implicit assumption, which I keep referring to as context, is another atomic claim. And then yes, you want to be able to go from one to the other, etc.
Okay. That's a very valid point, but let me expand on that. I agree that if I identify a presupposition, it's an interpretation. So I'm basically saying this claim as stated is actually equivalent to the compound of the original statement plus the implicit presupposition, which is a compound.
It might not be. It depends on whoever said it.
And that's a claim. It's an interpretation, and an interpretation is a claim. I'm claiming that equivalence, and somebody may disagree and say, no, actually the presupposition was that one.
Or we're talking about curation again. Yeah.
No, we're talking about identifying the set of premises, which I thought was your game.
I think at this point, I'm ready to say I'm actually not doing argument mapping, and base layer is not argument mapping. Layer 2 is argument mapping. Everything you say is probably indeed, if you want to do argument mapping, that's what you should be doing.
I don't think anybody wants to be doing argument mapping. We want, it's just that argument mapping is the closest tool to what we want to do.
Yeah, but argument mapping is its entire history and design is like based on this fact that one person does the mapping of the arguments. And the key thing that I keep trying to highlight is you can't just make this a collaborative tool and expect it to work, because people map things differently, and there will always be conflicts in how things are mapped. And you,
how am I not taking that into account?
No,
I'm sorry, it's fundamental for me. I agree totally. I'm actually saying, let's make that map explicit and say that's a claim, and that's the claim we're making. We're saying that this argument as stated this way is equivalent to that other claim as stated this other way, which is more explicit, where the
is that centralizing disagreement, everything you're talking about now? For me, not. For me, this is all meta fluff about what is the correct way to construct the argument. Whereas what I'm interested in is what are the actual claims people are disagreeing on.
No, I think it is
any particular other claim. I don't think like equivalent.
I didn't answer at once because I'm not always sure what you mean by centralizing disagreement, because the definition keeps shifting a bit. But I think yes, in the sense that it is about saying what are the premises we agree or don't agree about. This interpretation work I'm saying is about exposing implicit premises, which is totally about saying what do we agree or don't agree on. And exposing implicit premises is central to that goal.
Stephen, I also think that there's something really important to take into account. If I'm understanding you correctly, that you're trying to create a place like where the arguments or claims that people are disagreeing on are centralized in one place. The thing about people arguing is that they're bringing a whole lot of context and oftentimes a whole lot of assumption and misunderstanding to conversations. I've personally done this myself, where like I've gotten online, I've seen something that someone wrote and I've argued against it, but then like going back and reviewing it later, I was like, wow, I wasn't even like on the same page as this person. If I only like stopped, slowed down, reread it over a couple times, because what happened was I saw a few key phrases or key words, my brain triggered a specific context, and then I brought a whole different argument from a completely different angle that was somewhat irrelevant. And just further argued it, and then they responded to that. And like
that's an excellent point, and that's why that's an excellent point, and that's why claims in a base layer are designed to be what I call free of context. They should be able to stand on their own. If the context is not defined, it's ambiguous, meaning that it can lead to more different contexts. And then the disagreement that should be visualized is exactly the disagreement in which context is assumed. That's what I mean by centralizing disagreement. If you have a vague claim that has different interpretations in different contexts, that's what I want to visualize. That's what I mean by centralizing disagreements.
But here's the thing, is that like the context that people are bringing are not explicitly stated. So it's not obvious. And it just ends up like what ends up being there is an absolute like mess of a conversation, because no one knows the secret context that people are actually coming from. It's not explicit, it's not obvious. And so like, it would be better if the context was explicitly stated. So someone could be like, oh, you're coming from this angle, you're triggered by this word, you're assuming all of this historical context that has never been explicitly stated on this platform, and to all the other people participating in the conversation is completely unknown.
That's why the it depends option is so important next to supporting and opposing claims. Well, the whole point of an it depends is exactly it depends on which context you assume, and you make that explicit.
And what I'm saying is where I do disagree with a lot of people in this group is that I don't believe in acontextual claims. I believe in making the context explicit, so that the set of contextual
wait, what is the context of this claim here?
Well, we don't know because it's been stated without context.
And yet, can we debate it? Are we able to get to the bottom of this question? I think so, without having to know where this came from. We can break apart.
That's what I'm kind of denying.
What is the virus?
I'm saying a lot of the actual debate around it will bring in context.
It will.
We want it or not.
It will. It will. It definitely will.
It'll
that
bring it
needs
in
to
where it's
be-
needed,
that-
where it's
that
relevant,
needs to be
right?
that needs to be
Yeah,
visualized.
but
That's what I mean by
so it
centralizing
needs to be
this.
made explicit. Yes.
Yes.
I think Stephen and I agree on
But
that.
where do you
This-
make it explicit? That this is what we're discussing. Where and how? What I don't want to do is that each and every person makes it explicit in their own silo and they're not connected in any way, because that's not centralizing this agreement. So you need
Agreed.
to find a mechanism by which they get centralized. That's what I'm arguing for.
I agree
And that
totally.
you do around this claim that Timothy is highlighting right now. This is that centralized point.
And this is why I'm proposing precisely, let's connect the original contextless claim to interpretations, and let's make that explicit.
Exactly.
Oh, actually, this means it's a compound with this interpretation and that
But
interpretation,
then we're talking about the
which
same
bring
thing.
in presuppositions explicitly.
Then we're talking about the same thing, because when we say a contextual claims, this is the claim we're talking about, the one that you call, where you then from that point on pull in extra context. That is the acontextual claim, if you will. So we're saying the same thing.
I think we may be, but so I see that in the base layer, and that means we have to have compounds and interpretations in the base layer.
Well, first of all, yes, I see context in the base layer. I don't see how you jump to compounds and the other things from that.
Because there will be multiple interpretations. With each interpretation is a compound. It's saying this claim plus elements of context.
Yes, okay.
That's a compound.
I like
That's
your analogy with Riem and team more, because the Riem is the interpretation and the team is within that interpretation what you can discuss. And then you can jump to different Riems, if you will, and they're all connected
That's
by...
not how I read Riem theme, but anyway,
Okay.
That's another conversation. But yes, I think I see what you're saying.
But yeah, okay, I also see what you're saying. In that sense, there are compounds, and that's why I said the overlap between what we've been discussing as context, compounds, logic, and all of they're also interlinked. My question is, what is the common denominator of all of that in a base layer, which we can represent? And for me, that's what I've been calling context. If it's something, yeah, if it's compound, perhaps.
I'm saying let's represent the context using a set of presuppositions and compounds, yes. And also interpretation of elements. Let's get there later. I think, Tim, do you want to show what you're doing?
Yeah, it's a very specific question, which is about your definition of centralization of disagreement. Because you have, which is weird, you want to reuse claims, right? Which means a claim can be used twice. But I mean, essentially, you have two claims here where one claim is, a part of this other claim, right? Well, so the question is, well, it's literally a part of it. In fact, if this is false, then this must be false.
Yeah, but yeah, okay. But in its broader sense, it supports it. It might be a part of it. That, yeah,
right. But my point is, if you're centralizing the disagreement, should this disagreement be sent about, this one where the science is showing that there's biomarkers in the genetics of the virus that don't occur in nature. Let's say that claim is being made. Should this point be made on the disagreement over this or on the disagreement over this?
Why not on both? That's how you centralize disagreement. Wherever people bring up these arguments against it is where you want to visualize it, because that's how you centralize it, regardless of which argument.
Okay, so let me ask another question. Should every argument made under here be replicated up here?
I have a question for you, Tim.
Wait, just a second.
The link between the full sentence and the one in the middle, SARS-2 was developed by humans, and the full sentence about the top in the middle, what's that link? Is that a support or is that a compound part of?
Which one? No, these are all, this is base layer stuff, so it's all just supports.
These are all supports. Yeah, I wouldn't jump to that. Okay, so you don't have compounds, you have support. Yeah. Okay, so for me that's meaningless. What I'm saying is, in my view, the link between the top and the bottom would be part of, and then I would have, meaning and I would put part of in the base layer, even if the logic of it would still be layer 2, and then saying that the bottom one SARS-2 as biomarkers that don't occur in nature supports the part. Of course, if it supports the part, it supports the compound. If that's the point.
Right.
And
My,
I don't
my
need,
question is,
and I don't need to add a separate support to the compound, because I can factor it through the part.
no, I know what can be done. My question is to Stephen on the base layer for centralizing disagreement.
Mhm.
Should every support and oppose of this claim be also copied to this claim as a support or oppose?
The base layer, you add arguments that people actually state. If people say, hey, but the SARS-CoV-2 virus was released as a weapon by the Chinese because, well, it has biomarkers that don't occur in nature, then that's what you add. And you don't, then you can discuss that, and that's where you can start. So here I would say, well, that doesn't say that the Chinese did it. It can be anyone, any human, right? I mean, then that's how you argue against it. That it doesn't really matter. As long as it's relevant, it gets added. If it's irrelevant, it gets removed through arguing against relevance. It's that simple. If people argue it, you add it. If they don't, it's never added. If it's irrelevant, it gets removed as irrelevant.
And you're saying that in the second layer, everything is cleaned up.
Yeah, the second layer is a improved visualization in a more structured argument form, maybe the ideal argument, and it simply points to the bottom elements and adds to them. Like, let's say the simple example of a compound is, yeah, they support, or a linked argument, let's call it, from argument theory, where they both support are needed in order to reach a conclusion. Yeah, that means that you can say A supports C because of B, and also B supports C because of A. You just add both forms. And if you have a layer that supports adding a compound, you just add both forms in the underlying layer. And that means that regardless of what you're looking at, you will see it. And you can, at that point, disagree with what is visualized.
So you're basically
okay, but you don't think this will be,
oh, sorry.
It doesn't concern you that you might be missing a piece of information here.
Where?
If somebody says,
I think that's the point of Stephen's idea.
I have photos
everything
of them.
humans say is captured in there, and everything nobody said is not in there. And in another layer,
Okay, but
this gets cleaned up and made more consistent.
okay, but
right?
In this case, what's happened is you have information that's extremely relevant to this specifically, but is being lost because somebody stated it elsewhere in a separate place and not where it's most relevant, which is a subset of that debate. So in other words, if you look at this claim right here, the fact that somebody stated this argument that is relevant to this case in a more complex version of the same claim.
That would happen on if you have a better structure. If you have a better way to structure it in layer 2, it would mean that you can automatically add it to both. I'm saying I'm not bothered by that in a base layer, no, because that's not the main purpose of a base layer. It's not about having the cleanest representation of all information. It's about aggregating.
Do you not imagine?
Sorry?
Do you not imagine people adding things directly to the base layer? You think all additions will be made through a layer 2?
It can be either, but I believe that an effective layer 2 can only work in aggregating everything together with different layers too, and even displaying subsets of a base layer as layer 2. I think that can only be effectively aggregated through a base layer that doesn't make these suppositions like that, because you might want to automatically add, I have photos of them making it in the lab, to 3 claims. Somebody else might want to automatically add it to 10 claims. That depends on how you envision a model layer 2. That's the point. And I find it very hard to ever find agreement on doing that. And I think the meetings kind of have shown that.
I put the boundary between the layers at a totally different point, by the way. I'd like to be able to show it. Can you give me the diagram URL for that?
But so to answer your question, no, I'm not concerned by that. That's a duplication I want to embrace. That's good.
That's not a duplication. I think it's the opposite. What I'm saying is, if the goal of the canonical debate and the goal of this layer is to centralize where disagreement happens, right?
Mhm.
But to put it another way, one of the reasons that I started with the Canonical Debate Lab is because I wanted to take all the arguments people are making everywhere on the internet or wherever else and put it in one place so everybody can look
Okay.
and have the same information.
So how is a long list of all the links to the web pages where people and articles where people make an argument in relation to, how is that not solving the problem?
Who's doing that?
No, that's my question. So you want to do that. You want to aggregate all arguments on one topic. So I'm saying,
No,
climate change
I
is
want to do
real,
it in
and
a
you
readable
list
way.
all
That's a straw man. You're straw manning me.
No, I'm not.
But I'm saying
I'm not making an
my
argument. I'm
point
asking a question.
my-
How does
my
that
point
not?
specifically
because
is
there's no
this structure
deduplication.
here. Yeah, this structure here, without creating an explicit hierarchy between these claims, creates the opportunity for somebody to make an argument in the wrong place. In other words, in the
What
place,
is the wrong place?
where,
Why
not
is
where you
why
need
is
it.
one
So
place?
yeah, I think you're not disagreeing. As far as I understand, Stephen is suggesting that this is the place where everything humans say is captured. Nothing more, nothing less. And then in different layers, you add structures and consistency. Ones that you're talking about, Tim.
I'm trying to understand
I
what's
understand
wrong
that, but-
about.
Is that what
Why
you're
is
saying,
it
Stephen?
more wrong to add I have photos of them making in the lab as a supporting argument to the top claim as opposed to adding it to the other one? How is it wrong? It fits in both.
Because if you put it exactly, well, no.
Is it wrong because you don't want it to be in two
Ideally,
places?
you put it here and you centralize the debate about whether it was made by humans here. So all you need here as the support, because if this is true, you don't need all this other stuff. All you need to know is this is true.
Who's
for whatever
them?
reason.
If them is Chinese researchers, it actually does belong to the top. Another problem with indexical claims, as Stephen should have
Oh,
said.
right. Yeah. Yeah. You're right. There's an in between.
I didn't want to go into that. I mean, for
Well,
now,
no,
let's
I
assume
have
that-
photos of.
But it can
someone.
belong. I agree with Stephen.
Okay.
It can belong on either, and I think that the whole point is. It's like progressive disambiguation, progressive formalization. We have progressive precision. What I would like to say is the claim the SARS-2 virus was released by bioweapons as the Chinese. That's the informal aggregate. I would say even at the layer 1 or layer 1.5, I don't care if we need to introduce another intermediate layer. But for me, that's the pre-logical layer, so I would call it layer 1. It's before layer 2. We say this is equivalent to a compound which has developed by humans. Those humans were Chinese, was released intentionally, blah, blah, blah. All the subclaims. And so those subclaims, more atomic, we know they're related, and we don't know exactly how because this is the pre-formal layer. We just know they're related, and that this is asserted by someone to be equivalent to the informal compound. So that means if I have an argument that supports or attacks the informal compound, it is supposed to be equivalent, according to that claim of equivalence, to the semi-formal or compound, the layer 1.5 compound. And hence we can ask, oh, can we assign it more specifically to one or some of the more atomic claims? That's a perfectly valid question to ask as a way of refining the argument.
Right. So,
But-
so you know, I think this here
I didn't
shows
quite
by
get-
using a base layer structure.
You
that
guys
the
were
base
trying to
layer-
understand what I mean by centralizing this agreement, and I feel like you're not really giving me the opportunity to explain that. You asked a question like, how does this centralize this agreement? And I don't think I got a chance to answer that question.
Okay, go for
If
it.
you draw an arrow to both, like you said, it's wrong, and then you said it belongs there. So first of all, I'm interested in knowing why that's wrong, why it should go there. My point is that people will disagree on where it goes. That's part of the problem I'm highlighting. People will model things differently. And my point is, if you add it to both, I do think that centralizes disagreement. I can try to explain why. If you don't understand it, I'd like to explain it. But I'd also like to hear why
No,
it doesn't
my question
centralize
is,
it.
my question is, if you don't add it to both,
No, his question is,
Then somebody will raise it. Somebody will make that point. I have photos of someone making it in the lab and add a supporting argument to the top one. That will happen.
I am interested in your answer to why is it wrong to put it at the top, because I don't see it as wrong.
And I don't see it as wrong to add it to 2.
Okay,
both.
there's different definitions of wrong. There's wrong in the sense of, you know, I consider right to be that every argument that is relevant to the claim be made on the claim. And the fact that you only added it to one place where it's relevant and not to the other is wrong because you've lost information. Okay,
Yeah,
that's the first definition of relevant. There's a
Incomplete.
second definition of, yeah, incomplete. There's a second definition of wrong,
Different.
which is readability, where essentially, because we know this is a hierarchical structure, and there are several layers at which this can be argued. Here, let me just give a sample of where this argument goes, right? You go from, in fact, there's mutually exclusive, overlapping mutually exclusive sets all over the place. So if it's developed by humans or happened in nature, if it was done intentionally or accidentally or happened in nature, there's everywhere you see these double things, you see mutually exclusive claims. Each one of these is essentially a layer in this hierarchy, right? Or a level of, you know, let's answer this question before we answer the next question, right? And when you have that, it is so much more readable to break it down to just this question of, was it developed by humans? Was it developed by the Chinese? Did they intend it as a bioweapon? Did they release it intentionally? Those are the questions. Those are the questions that need to be answered. The proof of whether this is true or not lies or revolves around those questions. And so if you break it up into those separate claims, then each argument that refers to one of those should just support that one. That's readability, and that's understanding what's going on. Because if you start throwing up scientific studies about, you know, SARS being found in bats or SARS biomarkers or whatever up here, you're making this one here unreadable, right? And so to me, it's wrong in terms of,
I think I said this
a
before.
kind of deduping, right? It's a kind of, you know.
Basically, it's not about readability. It
I
isn't to
understand
me.
that.
Stephen, could you reply
understand
to
that.
what Jamie said in the chat?
Well, it's the same, and I agree that the sum of human argumentation is most comprehensively expressed media. That's my point. I don't want the best way to express an argument is in an existing media, in a full text argument. The way to combine different arguments and aggregate them is in a different structure that just visualizes what are all the common claims, where do all these different articles agree on these claims, and which ones do they disagree on. That's what I mean by centralizing disagreement, which is very messy and unreadable and has a lot of...
Did you read the rest?
No, I'm still reading, sorry. Layer 1 is internet news, books. If layer 2 is a cleaning up process, I think most effectively don't train people following some... Yeah, but you're talking about, okay, I also agree with that. I'm not against a layer 2 of a cleaning up process, but I'm talking about how can you link people cleaning this up to one central database where people might have differing opinions on how you clean it up, which is what all these meetings are about.
Here's the thing though, everyone is going to have, like you said, everyone is going to have different opinions about how things are to be cleaned up and organized, right? So it's a matter of what is the purpose of doing the cleaning up process? Because here's the thing, unfortunately, just like with Wikipedia, they burn a lot of people out because some people have more time in the day to argue about how their thing should be organized or how their thing should be prioritized in the top paragraph versus lower paragraphs, etc. So like what the platform will become if it relies on people arguing to justify the correct organization of the content and the process of how to clean up stuff, it's the people who have the most time in the day and the most skin in the game, egotistically or otherwise, that are going to determine how things are shaped. Now, if your goal is to use debate, deliberation, argument mapping for like an inquiry into truth, or like how can we use debate
You muted yourself.
true, then you probably don't want to rely on the people who just have the most time in the day to spend on the platform, because they're going to imbue it with all of their biases. And this is the kind of shit that happens on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is supposed to be like completely objective and just, you know, inform the public. And I get on little wiki wars because people are being hella biased, and those people have more time in the day than I do. So the article ends up biased. So my whole point is that, like, yes, I completely agree. Like, take information as people are structuring them. But this already exists. This is the internet. This is news. This is books. This is all this stuff. People are using the internet as their platform to make their arguments.
It's
And on
unlinked. The current.
and then in some other platforms, people are able to argue against that. Someone posts on Reddit their argument, someone responds to that argument. So debates already exist across platforms.
Yeah, but not on atomic claims. It right now, yes, it happens, and you can link to web pages, but they're full articles. That's what I'm saying. If you break up those full arguments and you extract claims and you link to those claims and you link the atomic pieces to how they support like a very fundamental model, then multiple competing arguments all contribute to the same claims. So the main thing that I'm interested in is claim deduplication of atomic claims, because once you have that and everyone links to the same claims, then you can aggregate and link and even visualize like how biased articles are, etc. Like, do they only talk about supporting claims or not? So no, we definitely don't have that right now. We don't have it to that level of granularity. We have like a higher level of granularity where you have, I write one argument, somebody else writes another argument. And that's the problem. How do you combine the essence of these two arguments?
Right. Well, let me just say, personally, the way that we do it, like my point was before, is that if you leave it up to the crowd to determine organization, those who will dominate the discussion are those who like have more time in their day, as opposed to people who may like actually be unbiased and inquiring into truth and really earnestly want to organize stuff so they can figure stuff out. That's what I'm just saying, is that the crowd is biased because it's a sampling bias. The people who have the most time, very specific psychology, are going to camp out on these things. Now, just let me finish. All I'm saying is that, for what it's worth, the Society Library has created a technique, we call it descriptive emergent structuring, which means that after we decompose all of these claims to their fundamental atomic claims and then group them together, we start just clustering things by categories, and the categories pile into other categories, and that indicates what we call the fundamental question, and then the question
fully agree with that process, but that's the outcome.
Argued.
You have an intermediate step in that process, which is what I call the base layer. Like, and that can be crowdsourced, and that base layer doesn't know these categories as they emerge yet. I fully agree with this process. It's beautiful what you're doing, but you could look at the base layer I'm talking about as the initial process, and then you start aggregating and curating and grouping as it emerges from the base layer. But I want to keep the base layer intact so that other people can do the same process. It's transparent, it's still falsifiable if you disagree with the categories, etc. And yeah, I don't know how to better express it than that.
Is there no...
The only way that I think that you can actually accomplish what you're thinking of in an organized way that's not just going to lead to creating more surface area for disagreement and actually create more agreement is if there is a more rigid process for how these things are combined and decomposed together, which requires some degree of like training, whether that's just like a video that teaches people how to do it, and like there being a step-by-step process that people follow in order to do that. And could it be accomplished by the crowd? Sure. I mean, there is like people who are part of the citizen science movement, where there are people who participate in citizen science and do peer review collectively and that sort of thing. So like there are high skilled people who may have an interest in like performing this with integrity and following certain rules to achieve certain outcomes, like the pursuit of truth or something like that. But the process needs to be more methodical and rigorous, in my opinion. And I personally don't think that we've completely articulated what that process should be, which is why we're doing the work that we're doing now with trained curators. It's literally like, how do we get from A to B using people who are...
Muted yourself again.
Sorry, I got a call. I don't know if I just got muted just a second ago. Following a set structure to accomplish that. And so like finding that structure is what's needed. And like, in my opinion, that's figured out by working with real data and real humans and their capabilities, and not trying to design it from the bottom up with architecture here.
This is okay. I agree with
Tons-
everything you said, but you can do both.
Yeah, and tons of specific disagreements. Sorry, Jamie, but I have hard stuff. And I think you may have too, if you're going to this other event.
I do. Yes, I do.
Okay.
Stephen, I just want to ask a real quick question, which is,
Mhm.
are you not planning on any sort of refactoring on the base layer?
Well, I'm trying to define what is a useful base layer to centralize this agreement. I have the use case in mind. I don't have, if refactoring the base layer leads to easier and still, if refactoring the base layer helps still making things falsifiable and centralizing this agreement, yes, and that refactoring would
Doesn't
involve...
the refactoring I did here, doesn't that...
No, because people right now that enter the cars, if people want to enter, I have photos of someone making it in the lab as a supporting arguments, because people make it commonly on top of the top claim, they can't see it there. If that's a very popular argument to make, that the first one that comes to mind, they have to know that it's structured as, oh, it was developed by humans. And as new arguments arise, a new structuring might arise, by the way. The structuring is only there because of the previous arguments that have been made.
Right, but you refactor it into something that's more centralized and more readable.
But
right?
I'm not against, by the way, this refactoring. My point is this is layer 2. I have nothing against on a base layer adding, I have photos of someone making it in the lab with both claims.
But so you're not going to refactor the base layer?
Sorry, Stephen, Tim, are you interested in continuing? Because I also have a bit more time.
I
And
have time.
Jamie and Marc-Antoine have to leave, right?
Yeah, I'd normally have to go, but I actually have a little more time now.
Okay.
So it would depend on the use case for me, whether or not refactoring is useful. And for me, refactoring primarily will have to do with claim deduplication, because that's what I'm saying all revolves around the fact that people are actually linking to the same atomic claims. When they're trying to add a claim to an argument they are making, it all relies on the fact that if the claim has already been made, they reuse the same claim. Because that's how you centralize, by claim reuse. If you all link to the same, like right now, you all link to the same paper, maybe, when you cite a paper, if you all link to the same claim.
Jamie, are you still there?
I'm here. I'll see you later. Bye.
No, stop. The event, the event date was a placeholder. It's not today. I just got an email to that effect.
Oh my God, how
Very
silly.
late.
Okay. All right, well, I've got a little bit more time too. What's up, guys?
Save the date for no reason at all. Just save the date.
Date was a placeholder and they're telling us today. Brilliant.
It's gonna be a bad event.
Okay, so you guys are staying?
Yeah.
We're here.
We were email at 11:23. Frankly, folks. Sorry.
I mean, by the way, Timothy, I must say, even on a layer 2, I would disagree that the best place to place I photos of someone making in the lab would be on by humans, because it's a less direct argument. I find the one that the premise you've hidden now underneath that one, because you like it, you think it's about a structuring. I don't think it is, concretely in this example.
Um,
I mean, you actually have proof. You have pictures of evidence of the very exact claim in its specificity listed at the top. Why would you add an intermediate abstraction that it was developed by humans? That's not the point of the top claim. It's about the Chinese. If you have photos of the Chinese making in the lab, I think it's more relevant to have that premise as a supporting claim. That's the agreement I want to centralize. If everyone agrees these pictures exist, that's hard evidence I want to centralize as agreements.
I think that was a very good question Timothy asked. Like, do you want to have refactoring in this base layer? And that's what you just mentioned, Stephen.
No, it's not refactoring. I would add it to both.
Like,
but what would happen is...
well, let me finish.
Yeah.
That's not the point. I just wanted to recap. Because I think if you start changing this layer, that it's not a perfect mapping of all the documents you find on the internet, for example, if people are allowed to reorganize in this layer, then you will, okay, yeah, just hypothetically then you will have the problems Jamie mentioned, like the Wikipedia wars.
You don't, it's immutable.
That it's Yeah, but it's still like a current state thing. Even
So the
though it's
requirements for
immutable. But
something being added as a supporting and an opposing argument.
wait, I'm not finished.
Okay.
Yeah. So you will have this thing like different people would structure different things differently, whatever. You have these wars. But if, as I understand correctly, then there's this either it's refactoring in the base layer, or it's a second layer on top that gives consistency and canonicality. Because if you have this canonical model that we all want, then there should be, in theory, not so many different ways to structure things, right?
Well, it depends what you mean by canonical.
If you don't allow people to restructure in the base layer.
But define restructuring.
You said it was immutable.
Yeah, so you can
It's
add and you
immutable.
can oppose, and the only thing that can be restructured in the base layer I see it is that completely irrelevant, like non sequiturs are removed.
You'd say the base layer is append only, then.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
I agree with that.
But you don't see a use of the structure being improved for any sort of readability or.
The base layer is not about readability, it's about centralizing.
Do you
disagreement.
have, okay, but do you intend for people to actually read it? Like, what is your intention on the base layer?
I want people to read a claim that they have expressed or they have written in their own articles or in the arguments they make, and see all the underlying claims and to which degree people agree or disagree on those. That's the intent.
Pure extraction.
But it's not for readability. So you want,
well,
like,
of course, the claims need to be readable. So, and that's where, yes, some claim deduplication will make sense, where you have two different claims. One is readable, the other isn't. And if the community really agrees these two claims are exactly the same, you could say, but this is what I would call curation. You can still even keep both claims as different formulations, but say this one is the canonical one, this one is the more readable one.
Let's take the immigration. Let's take the immigration example.
Yeah.
Right. There's hundreds of different immigration types in 100 different locations, thousands of locations in the world. Mm-hmm. Right. And the debate about immigration is good. Spans all of this. And we know that that's the most general thing. And you're going to have, well, it depends. Right. Yeah. So do you want to see at the it depends level, people go and click and they look and they say, well, it's good in Texas, but it's not good in Washington, but it's great in Indonesia, but it's terrible, in Paris. And then this little neighborhood there, it was really bad for that. And this study shows that, in other words, how many studies are there about immigration? And essentially what you're saying is all this information that should be broken down and organized into more digestible chunks deserves its place at the top layer where people can see every single argument made at the top layer.
I'm not certain what you meant by top now, but they should be linked.
Because immigration is good. Immigration is good. That's the top layer. What I mean by top layer is the most general case, right? Because every single one of these points, top claim. Every single one of these points are relevant to the top claim. They're not zero relevance.
What I want to show is
that the relevance diminishes from layer to layer to layer, right? But
the agreement also changes from layer to layer. So what I want to show is if immigration is good, is a very, like, nobody can agree on this. What I want to show is like, wait, well, it depends. And here are some types of immigration that people can agree on. It's good. Here are some ones that are still like contrived. Which one are you interested in? That's what I mean by centralizing this agreement. You show what people agree on and you show where they disagree.
But isn't it more digestible and understandable if you show it at the point where there's variation, which means
but that's
it might be good for the people living there versus sure it is. But that's why you refactor. Property
from having the arguments in the first place. That's the outcome of what Jamie is
doing.
But
you refactor so it's more digestible.
I'm saying you don't refactor.
Okay.
It's the outcome of the base layer. That's what. Once you have done that in the base layer, then you have found the categories where people agree and disagree. Then you can group them, and then you can better structure the discussion. And that's what Jamie does.
Right, but do
That's
you
the
expect
outcome.
people
Can you
to,
please,
but
guys,
again, my
respect
question is, do you
Marc-Antoine? He
expect
raised his
people to
hand.
view?
Please let him talk.
Yeah.
I think we're losing a lot of time here because we're not defining things as well as we could. You had one definition of the base layer, Stephen, which was about a kind of pre-logical layer, if I understood well. And I totally believe in that. There's a layer which I don't know if it's the same or it's distinct, but I think it's distinct and it needs its own name, where we, and this is, I totally agree with you, by the way, there has to be a layer where we accumulate all claims and all records of claims having been made, and this layer is append only, and this layer is, and when we say that two claims are equivalent, that's also an append only. Like it's not a refactoring in a sense that we don't delete anything, we just say those two are equivalent, and that's a claim, and it can be debated. So we have, and I'll come back to Jamie's objection about there's no end to this process soon, but there has to be, but that layer is probably not legible as such. And Tim is right to ask that question because at some point there will be millions of related arguments. And this comes to a point I made way back up about distinguishing between a hierarchy and a feature matrix. Let's take the precise argument about immigration is bad. We can distinguish immigration by which immigration in which place. Are we speaking about refugees or legal immigrants or illegal immigrants? That's a legal status distinction. Are we speaking, what kind of bad are we talking about? What are the criteria for? And these are all independent axes of subdivision. And this is why it's a lattice and not a hierarchy, because there's no natural order of these subdivisions. Like let's subdivide along this axis first and then on this axis. No, they're all, you can subdivide on whichever axis makes sense to you first, and then on another, and then on any other. And sure, it's a lattice, so you can say, okay, I'm interested in this intersection of this on those points of comparison, but I'm not interested in that point of comparison. I want all of that here. And that's what a lattice is. So those are ways to view, it's a groupment, and that's a UX constructed thing where you say, given all the pointed filters I could make, I'm doing on the fly grouping of subkinds of subdivisions of this statement from a layer where everything is there and is eligible as such. And then we can have curated maps as a layer above that, which says, okay, we want this to be legible, so we'll make a curated map. Totally distinct operation, totally distinct layer. But a layer where everything is stored, I agree with you, Stephen, it has to exist. That layer has is append only, and there's no curation in the sense of deletion, but there's curation in the sense of I'm saying that this and this are the same. And that's a claim and it's debatable.
Well, we don't agree there, but we don't have to talk about that now because that's why it brought the distinction between curation and a functional
anyway,
actual base layer. But, yeah.
Why I was rolling my eyes so much is I think the notion of base layer as the alogic, pre-logical layer, which I agree with, and a base layer where we store raw facts about what arguments have been made without regrouping them explicitly and canonicalize them, which is also, I agree, necessary, but I think those are distinct facts and distinct access.
Which two are?
When you speak of base layer as the layer before logic and
but
the layer where
you introduced that.
No, it's sorry.
I argued that I don't want logic because I mean it's a consequence. It's not a reason. Again, I think I've explained the use case for the base layer. The fact that I don't want to model logic in there is a consequence of the use case. It's not like I want the base layer to be not containing logic. If it would serve the use case, I would add it there. If that makes sense.
Okay, fair enough. It was my interpretation of
because support and oppose is also logic, right? But it serves centralizing disagreements.
You have to understand that your notion of centralizing disagreement, your package. This is an example of a claim that is atomic to you, but is actually extremely compound to us. And I'm saying there's many ways to decompose it.
It's ambiguous. It's undefined.
Yes. Yeah, well, yes.
But that's I still call atomic. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm saying atomic is not a fixed status of a claim. So if you
define
say
atomic, we're disagreeing on what atomic means now.
No,
Yeah, right.
And it's
atomic,
hard to define as well, as Timothy correctly pointed out.
and I'm saying atomic is a temporary status. It's not a property of the claim. It's we haven't decomposed it yet.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, adding supporting and opposing claims in a way is decomposing a claim. So yeah, I agree. But that's not what I mean by atomic claim.
That's not, by the way, that's not what I meant by decompose. So for me, that's a non sequitur. I meant saying this claim. I did mean identifying implicit arguments, however, which for me is not the same as support oppose.
And I see overlap there because it is by adding supporting and opposing claims that you very often have to start making implicit context explicit, and then that's why you centralize this agreement, because then all of a sudden, oh yeah, well, I don't think that's true, and then you move to a more concrete claim, right?
Yeah.
But yeah,
often, but not necessarily. Anyway,
where does that leave us, though? First of all, I hope it's a bit clear why I don't see it as a problem that like stuff is added all over the place as supporting claims. That is the nature of it. It represents that people structure arguments differently. And yes, I want to capture it in basic. I agree that's not the most readable form. That's not the goal here. The goal is to have an overview where you can quickly see these are the central claims where there's disagreement. These are the central claims where there's agreement. In the case of the Pluto overview, you've seen many times, yes, there's like a shitloads of claims underneath there, but there will be two that are highlighted as disagreement, being Planet X and Pluto. The other ones, there's no disagreement on them.
This will be raw data. This will not be input to visualization without a huge processing layer.
You mean you don't want that? Yeah, so I do want that. And that's what I'm building.
Yeah, but you still haven't explained to me your use case. Like I don't understand.
I want people to land on a claim that they express as part of an argument. Pick any claim in here. Pick any claim that someone would express as part of an argument that Google's for.
SARS-CoV-2 was developed by humans.
Yeah. Now I want them to see where do people disagree and agree. You have 1, 2, 3 underlying claims here. Like apparently.
Yeah, but you didn't have this claim there. You don't have that one. You don't get that one.
Do you think it belongs there? Then add it there.
Well, nobody noticed because they were focusing up here and somebody else.
No, they're focusing on SARS-CoV-2 was developed by humans. So, okay, you're trying to find agreement and disagreement. So you're reading, okay, SARS-CoV-2 has biomarkers that don't occur in nature. Yes, that's a strong argument, but it has been found in bats. Okay. So that's indeed relevant context to this.
But you're missing something. You're missing. I have photos.
Yeah, but you're always missing something. It's always incomplete. The point is, if you know something that somebody else hasn't added, you add it.
The point is, if you have somebody curating, or if the crowd curating, and you're reorganizing it so that it's more intelligible, more centralized, more organized around the different parts. When somebody comes in and says, I have photos to comment here, and they say, oh, it was developed by humans and it was developed by the Chinese and it was released, whatever, they might go, oh, yeah, I want to show that it was developed by humans, and they go and put it down here instead of, and my worry about not doing curation in the base layer is you get garbage in. We know we're going to get garbage in.
What is the garbage here? Because this is incomplete data.
The garbage here is people putting stuff in the wrong place, people stating it.
You're saying wrong again, but
they can.
So what's wrong with having a layer 2 that does exactly what you say you want to do, Timothy, that automatically, if somebody says, I have photos of someone making in the lab, gets added as supporting claim that it also gets added on the other one.
The garbage layer grows like a crystal or a snowflake. People are going to keep adding their stuff as it is. And if you're trying to curate this in a layer 2 and reorganize it into something more intelligible, and stuff keeps getting added to stuff that you factored away,
but that's why layer 2 is
your layer 2 is growing apart from your base layer. If you don't iterate and clean up the base layer,
there I agree.
Your models grow apart.
Layer
And
2
that's
is
my
a
problem.
subset of the base layer. That's what I've always said. It's a subset, it's a view on, and it,
No.
And then you're limiting the ability to refactor the layer
No,
2.
For
And I don't
me,
want
it's
to limit
impor-
that ability.
For me, it's important to be able to say, if we have the notion, I wouldn't say wrong, but improvement on, saying this link is more precise than that link. And hence it replaces, and unless that is itself contested, it means that we can safely skip the replaced improved link.
can you give an example of
No,
what we're looking at right now?
That's
Because-
exactly, like, suppose, basically what I'm saying is if someone, as you said, adds the link, I have photos of someone making it in the lab to SARS-CoV-2 was developed by humans. Okay, you add this link, that's one operation, but you separately say, this is an improvement on the original link from I have photos of someone making it in the lab to the SARS-CoV-2 virus was released as bioweapon by the Chinese. So you're not just making a link, you're also saying this link is an improvement to that link. So it kind of obsolete that link. So I would have basically a separate link.
Can you explain me how it's an improvement though? Because for me, they're perfectly valid on both. So what's the improvement here?
It's more precise.
Which one is more precise than which one?
The bottom one is more precise than the top one. It's, you know, when Tim said that it improves readability, yada yada, I said that doesn't mean the top one was wrong, but it does mean the second one is an improvement.
Wait, no, I'm totally at a loss. You're saying that I have photos of someone or the Chinese? What is this claim saying?
Yeah, the problem with the problem is someone undefined. So we don't
I have
know
a photo of
Chinese.
someone. I have a photo of someone, and I don't know who. I just have the photo, but I know they're making SARS, right?
Yeah, so we don't know this person, whether this person is Chinese or not, or working for the Chinese or not, right? Person could be Chinese, but working for US government, who knows? And so the photo of someone making it in the lab improves the more precise sub-premise, which is part of the decomposition, interpreted decomposition, which presumably was not contested. Somebody said, for me, that's not a support, that's a decomposition, proposed decomposition. And hence, saying that I have a photo of someone making a lab, which of the decomposed claims, the more atomic claims is being targeted by this argument, it's an improvement because it's more precise and hence it's more readable.
So I'm not, first of all, I'm not arguing that an improved link on a base layer would be totally out of scope. I'm arguing that if somebody says I have photos of someone making in the lab supports the Chinese, that's good. That's somewhat relevant. And then you want to oppose that. You want to, someone stupid enough to make that argument. I want to show them, well, that's irrelevant because
and I agree with
someone
you there.
doesn't necessarily have to be
it's
Chinese.
Interesting. It's interesting at a historical level that maybe somebody historically made that argument, and we want to keep that link.
Yes.
I'm with you.
So that's what I call base layer, and then whether or not the improved link belongs in the base layer, that becomes a question of.
But I also agree with Tim that it's important to have a way to say, oh, can we eliminate that link in certain views? And that's what the improved thing is for.
But if you eliminate the link, you remove discussion, then someone will again add it. So if someone actually adds the arguments,
views can erase history. Some views can erase history. I agree that the data should not erase history, but some views can choose to erase history.
Okay,
just as some views can erase logic.
Yeah, but that's what that view is what I would call layer 2. And that's why I said it's a subset of the base layer.
Sure. It's a separate view. But I agree with you that I would not lose the original link because it was taken from a real document. It's real, it's got provenance. It's important.
I would even go as far as to say, if you want to model as a specialization of or more accurate, that would probably go as a opposition on the original one. You're saying it's not accurate enough.
I'm saying the improvement is a sub kind of opposition. Yes,
or
improved by precising is a kind of opposition.
So it's the same.
Absolutely.
I mean, you allow a non-structured way where you can write out, and it's very difficult to write a claim out of context, like it says, well, the fact that somebody did this doesn't mean they were Chinese or whatever. You can see it becomes icky. So having some better way of saying this is an improvement of, as as a fundamental base type, I'm not necessarily against.
And this is why I always say we need recursive hyperlinks, because this is a case where we had to do an arrow between two arrows. It's a case, it's a real. Okay, folks. What do you think, Tim? I think I've reconciled you two from my viewpoint. I don't know if you feel like I have.
I don't think, well.
Do we know where you're disagreeing now?
Yeah, good question. That's the question.
I think several words popped up like wrong, it's modeled wrong, and it's not central. I think we're still disagreeing on what that means, and readable.
No,
I mean,
yeah,
all
no,
of
no,
these
no.
things I agree with on a way, but that's not what I'm trying to say. I
Yeah,
want to do
no.
all of that on a layer 2.
The problem, the worries I have
Mhm.
are twofold. One is I'm worried that the base layer will not be, it will be impossible to maintain layer 2 and base layer consistent at some point if it's not able to refactor the base layer. That's the first
Consistent,
concern.
to keep them consistent.
Yeah.
What does
Because
consistent mean?
consistent means at any point, if somebody adds a new argument to somewhere in the base layer, there is an equivalent location in layer 2. In other words, I think it's possible that people will add stuff to the base layer that are obsolete in layer 2, have no mapping, no equivalence.
That's
right?
what I call the falsifiability of layer 2, exactly. Like if you assume a formalized form that gets rendered onto a base layer and people add stuff that's not represented in a layer 2, that's where the reduced form becomes falsifiable, and that's on a claim level only, not on the higher formalisms.
Except that I don't think that it would be an equivalent. I think that the structure of the current debate, the current argument map, influences each next iteration. Each new thing that's added grows off of what's already there. And we know that a debate structure is not the only way to structure the same debate, right? So you can have equivalent structures that are mapping the same debate, and yet they're doing it in a different way. And yet you get arguments that are influenced according to the way it's currently represented itself, right? Somehow the evolution of the argument map itself affects the debate that's being had, right?
I agree with that basic point, Tim. I think that's a very important point, actually. And we want, canonicality mean we don't want to be too path history dependent. And so I'm with you on that concern. But my solution to that, and once again, my solution to that is the one in hyper knowledge is to have all the structures side by side and compare them, so we can either decide on a convergence or not. And if not, then we'll grow all the structures until we see which one leads somewhere interesting. And we still have the equivalence between them.
My intuition on that is that it's too much mental overhead for people to do that kind of work. And my gut tells me that you will get a better result. You will get a better result having one structure, but kind of cleaning house as you go along, which means following certain heuristics for best practices of how to organize debates, right? Decomposing when you can decompose, that sort of thing.
And my belief is that getting people to agree on that one structure is the pipe dream. You have a quite accurate and possibly correct description of why my version is a pipe dream, and I'm saying people to agree on one structure is the pipe dream.
That's my point as well. That's why I want a base layer that doesn't presuppose one or the other. It allows
except that the base layer is enforcing one, and that one is an effect of who came first and in what order.
Wait, can you say why it enforces one? I mean, if there's anything that you can do in the way you want to formalize arguments and structure them for all the reasons you're saying, on layer 2 pointing to a base layer 1, then I agree that's a problem. But I'd like to see an example of that, because that's what I don't get. I don't see the problem.
In a federated data context, it doesn't enforce one because you'd have many histories competing and federated.
Yeah, but then you don't have a canonical debate.
No,
Yes, you do.
independent,
Yes, you do.
independent from
Federation is
infrastructure.
canonical. Federation is canonical.
Independent from infrastructure, just pure representation. Like you want to represent like arguments in one way, you feel there's a canonical way you can find or curate or decide on collaboratively. If you have a problem with only having support and oppose on a base layer, and there's no mapping to a base layer, of course you cannot use a base layer. My point is, the way I see it right now, we can always make that mapping, and then the base layer serves a purpose, which is centralizing different types of mappings and people only having to point to a claim and centralizing disagreement around that. If you cannot do that, please give an example, because then that will be a very interesting discussion. Because then there's
We'll have to come up
obvious,
with it in the mappings. Yeah.
because of course that has to be able.
I mean, I can give one clear case where it's not impossible, but it just adds so much overhead to the people maintaining the layer.
Maintaining layer 2 or the base layer?
Layer 2. And there's a second case, which is that the layer 2 is going to have to write to the base layer, right? And so essentially the base layer is going to become superimposing every single possible variation of the debate into one structure, which
Yes,
that's the point.
It's not going to be readable.
It's not supposed to be readable. It's supposed to centralize. Depending on which structure you come from, the purpose of the base layer is, if you disagree with either one of those, or you want to see all the different arguments or structures that people have had around certain claims, that's why it gets centralized.
The way I see it, you need to create curated views. Readability is not a property of the base data structure because it's supposed to represent everybody's point of view. Exactly. And that's necessarily unreadable. So indeed, you have multiple curated views, each of which is readable. So when you see something in one context, you are made aware, oh, there's these other ways of seeing it, these other curated views, these other maps of that same claim that put that same claim in different contexts. Mm-hmm. But having one unique view that shows all viewpoints, I don't think that's possible. No, it won't be readable. I agree totally with you.
That's the main point I've been trying to get across.
But then is it usable? Then is the question, yes. Is the base layer usable? Or is it just a data store of every single possible?
It's usable for a different use case. It's usable.
What is the use case? I'm still not clear on the use case, because right now the use case is collecting all the possible arguments that people make either through a layer 1 or
it's
layer 2.
Less about arguments. That's why I said it's not really about argument mapping. It's about finding all the claims that people agree or disagree on, which regardless of how they use that in arguments, regardless of that, like, which makes them judge like a conclusion to be true or false. That's what it's about. Like, I don't care about the messiness of the Pluto representation with so many underlying claims. What I want to show is that obviously it's about Pluto and Planet X. The other ones there's agreement on them. That's what I mean by centralizing agreement and disagreement. And yes, it's obviously not the best structure to make the argument that there are 10 planets.
But you're not going to see that. You're not going to see that.
You know, what are you not going to see? Where?
You're not going to see that Pluto and Planet X are the main point of disagreement.
Okay, why not?
Because your layer 1, your base layer, is going to be unreadable.
No.
It's going to have all the planets, and it's going to have all the claims made in layer 2, like.
Can I tell you how it will become readable? I mean, people express their opinions on these claims. People express whether or not Pluto is a planet or not. They express whether Planet X is a planet. They express whether all the other planets in the solar system are a planet. People will generally...
Yes, but they're also going to express whether the planets of the solar system are Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and Uranus. And they're also going to express the planets of the solar system: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto. And they're also going to express, and those are going to be there. Why? Because layer 2 is going to write to layer 1 these arguments, which are arguments, another way of looking at it. And so they're going to see the names of the planets, and they're going to see these other ones. And base layer does not support scoring. And so what you're going to have is everybody's going to score
Timothy,
it, which determines the relevance in a layer 2.
Timothy,
layer
just a
1's
second,
just
because
gonna
you're
be a
jumping
collection
way
of
ahead.
these.
Can you pick one claim where you think that it will be unclear? Of what it is showing now? Which
There
claim
are
are you currently
9
looking at
planets
in the
in the
base
solar
layer?
system.
There are 9 planets in the solar system. Yes.
And so you have all these are planets stated as arguments in the base layer, right?
Yeah.
And then you will also have these stated as arguments.
Yes. So which ones will people more likely agree or disagree on? That's exactly. So if you add all of these, the ones that people will disagree on is the summaries that include Pluto, the summaries that include planet X. If you add the individual ones, the individual planet Pluto and the individual planet X.
Okay,
and then
but you're also going to have, wait, I'm not done. You're also going to have society library arguments in here. And you're also going to have somebody else's layer 2 arguments in here.
Wait.
And you're also going to have somebody else's layer 2 arguments in here.
What do you mean by society? Which arguments are you referring to now?
I'm referring to the fact that layer 2, which has a different way of visualizing and allows people to enter arguments.
Yes.
Are going to write it to the base layer.
Yes.
Using their own paradigm of how they think
it maps to the base layer, yes.
Yeah. And when that happens, what you will have is overlap, but sets of arguments that were created because of a view from a different layer. The different ways of organizing and viewing the debate are all going to be present.
Can you give one example?
Do you agree that there's more than one way to represent a debate?
Yes, and that's what I'm trying to erase and centralize. That's my point. In the base layer,
you're trying to erase it.
Layer 2 is a layer in which you have multiple ways of representing debate, using and as you're highlighting here, etc. In the base layer, all you have is claims supporting and opposing other claims and relevance. That's what layer 2 maps to. So whatever structure that you do if you want to use an and in a layer 2, what I'm saying is, well, then add it to the base layer as 2 separate premises supporting the conclusion. That's the mapping to the base layer. And you can even say, then add, like, if it's a linked argument, which an and is, I suppose, then add each pair, yeah. If A and B support C, then add A supports C, because B, etc., and vice versa. Add all of that to the base layer. That's the one-way mapping from layer 2 to a base layer. If now somebody comes in and they only add A, that's fine, it's already there. If they only add B, it's fine, it's already there. If they add A, B, and C in their layer 2, that just means that C gets added to the base layer as well. That's what centralization means. You don't have to agree on the differences in formalization or structuring in layer 2. What is important is that it gets centralized.
With centralized, you mean like deduplicated?
Yeah. And that's what I mean by atomic claim, and that's why claim duplication is the main concern of the base layer. Because of course, if somebody adds a phrase slightly differently in layer 2, that's the main problem. That's the problem I sketched with what do you do if somebody only adds A, only B, A, B, and C, A and B? Like, how do you, on a base layer, if you allow that, how do you decide? You have to decide. What Marc-Antoine and I are saying is, I don't think you can ever agree on that. I think it's a pipe dream that you can agree on how to do that. If you want to allow disagreement on that, I'm saying the minimum you can do is in a base layer, just add all of them in a more destructured form.
we're almost in agreement here. Sorry, I did get distracted. But I agree that the shape of which premises is involved is debatable in the base layer, because for me, that's in a way, it's the relevance argument, right? But what happens within that, I would say, yeah, we can keep that for another layer. But the relevance set, I would have multiple competing relevance sets for an argument, because deciding which is the relevant set for me is part of the.
Yeah. And I said I agree with you on that. I think
okay. I just thought I heard you say the opposite.
No, I think it's a very useful abstraction to have in the base layer, at least accessible and maybe represented as well. I agree on that. That's the only common denominator I think that you can do in terms of high level structuring, is saying which premises do you use to set your. I agree on that. That's super useful for a base layer, because if you have 50 arguments, it doesn't matter how they're structured, all agreeing on the same premises. That's super useful information, of course, to represent one way or another in a base layer, regardless of how they're structured.
What's, by the way, I'll have another hard stop at the hour in 20 minutes. So I think we've been going on. I would like to point out, I'm more and more coming up. One reason I'm agreeing with this is I want the logic to be a bit pluggable, but I'm certainly thinking within a system, within a hyper knowledge thread, if you will. I would expect to have a logic model that is specific to that thread. And as I said, I'm working on this paraconsistent logic system. And what I realized recently is that what I have to hold about any one claim is, here is its current logic status, and here's, as in the base layer, all the antecedents of that logic status, all the claims who have a certain logic status that are relevant to that, and what is there. Like, the idea is each claim has a set of antecedents, which is monotonically increasing, which means that the number of antecedents is in a way the age of the claim. So I can store just for each claim, its logic status, the size of its claim collection, and that's it. I don't have to store its antecedents. So if it's a claim I'm interested in, I'll store their antecedents and their antecedents logic status with kind of claim cardinality clock, but I won't store their antecedents. And I will see, and that becomes a CRDT. I can just see, oh, this premises logic status was updated. Hence, I know I have to recalculate my logic status of this claim I'm storing locally without storing all the claims. If I'm a client and I'm only interested in a subset of the claims, but I'll still get a CRDT so that I can recalculate my logic status given some server updates and some local state, which may not be shared with the server. And that means I have also enough information to say, oh, this claim has been contested, not supported. I can eject it temporarily. If somebody else supports it, then I'll reintroduce it and keep a manageable cache that way of which claims have which truths. And this is interesting for me because it's both logic, but it's a way to know which claims I'm storing in a cache. It may sound a bit esoteric or precise, but this unification of microclaim status at the event level, at the event sourcing, versus logic status at the social level, who contradicts, who agrees, who disagrees, is for me a huge achievement. So that's my.
I don't think I got quite all of that, but maybe you can try to rephrase how it's related to this discussion, the key point for that, because that's the main thing I want to get.
Yeah, I agree with you that there's something very fundamental in storing the set of antecedents of a claim. What are, and there can be multiple antecedents and so on, but because it also, it's obviously obvious for what we're doing, but I'm saying it's also obvious to me as a way to have a CRDT structure on claims where I'm caching a set of claims around a set of topics, but I don't want disproven claims, but I want to know that this claim is being disproven. And I know it's a CRDT, so that means if a claim comes after it's being disproven, I want to know that. So this is what I'm trying to achieve, a CRDT of claim value that is kind of reordering resilient and allows me to track the truth value of a bunch of claims.
And you're saying this base structure would support that or not support that? It
would support it.
Okay.
It's isomorphic. The same base structure supports that.
Okay.
Which for me is interesting, that I can use the same base structure as two totally different layers. And it's independent of how the truth value is computed. If it's a purely Boolean versus very elaborate two-axis.
And you just know it's an adjustment. That's all you care about.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I got the gist of it. Timothy is thinking, but we also have to wrap up soon, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's a fundamental philosophical difference or something between, regarding the immutable base layer. So
yeah, that's why I brought it up, because I noticed the same, but whenever I was like wrong and it doesn't belong there and it's not canonical, and I always feel we don't agree on what wrong is or canonical is or what the use cases are.
I mean, I would say that, I want to preserve history because of full transparency. I don't want people to show, I want people to see nobody's cheating, right? It's a trust thing. And I want people to be able to find their arguments where they may be. But for the same reason that I don't want to link in books and other outside contexts, and I want claims free of context. I want to be able to look at a claim and let people debate it. Have it disambiguated so you don't have confusion as to definitions or what somebody means. But then you can just dive right in and debate it, based on facts and values and whatever. For that reason, I also don't see any reason to preserve exactly the way the debate was structured by people who came in from the outside. Like, the point to me is to constantly massage and show people an intelligent way to organize a debate, let them understand, when something is more relevant, something is less relevant, and show that they made their point there, but we moved it down here where it's more relevant.
Yep,
right.
I agree with that.
I don't want to preserve
the discussion, Timothy, is whether or not these are orthogonal goals. I'm not saying that's not a worthwhile goal I don't want to pursue. I'm saying
I know it's not orthogonal.
Yeah.
I know it's not orthogonal, but first, my intuition is that the base layer is going to be unusable for a human. And second, it's going to become or grow incompatible with any layer 2 that I find usable and maintainable.
Well, the clear example is model compounds in layer 2. Do you know what I mean by that? The thing that you've always disagreed
I'm not even talking about structures now. I'm just talking about reorganizing. Like, just take a layer 2 that is the exact same structures as layer 1, but it supports refactoring.
But it's not the exact same structure.
Layer it's the exact same. No, it's the exact same elements. It's the exact same model.
But it's not.
No, he says like.
That's the point. Layer 2 is not the same model.
No, I'm saying imagine a layer 2 that is the exact same model as the base layer.
But what's
in other
the
words, it has claims and support. That the only difference between the two is this layer 2 supports refactoring, curation. Okay, yes. It's mutable. Just that tiny difference. My belief is, at some point, you will not be able to map back and forth between the two.
No, because it's the same model, but the whole point is it's a separate model. It's a separate layer. Layer 2 points to layer 1. That if it's the same, of course, it's not going to work.
Any refactoring is adding links and removing links, right?
Right.
So if any link added in layer 2 is also added to layer 1, it can point to the layer 1 equivalent structure. And removing links, well, okay, we're saying we're removing the link. But it's still true that everything in layer 2 will point to the corresponding layer 1 structure, except in layer 1, there will be all these links that have been removed in layer 2. But there's no link in layer 2 that won't exist in layer 1. It's theoretically possible that layer 1 becomes everything's linked to everything else, which is perfectly unusable. And that's why I agree. I don't expect layer 1 to be usable except as an archive.
Well, and
here I
except
disagree
that
with Steven.
there's still curation on layer 1 that can also be expressed
Exactly.
on layer 2. That's
Exactly.
why I'm saying you
would have the
non-sequiturs.
improve is a temporal and or priority aspect, which enables you to retrieve the layer 2 structure from the layer 1 alone.
As well.
Because
yeah, but that's definitely a useful link to have. But that's
there's
what
no
it is. It's a link,
reason why
not
you
more.
wouldn't keep the links between the 2 layers. I'm saying here's the link. Every time you create something in layer 2, make sure it exists in layer 1, and make sure you have the history of removals in layer 1.
And I
so
think the links are
you
the
can
sets,
reconstruct
right?
layer 2 from layer 1. That's it. Mapping done. Next question.
No, except that my question then is, why a layer 2 and a layer 1? Why not just a layer 1 and 2 together in a single layer, but you
because
evolve
layer 2
history,
doesn't
so you
centralize
preserve
these
the
agreements. Layer 2 doesn't solve the problem. How do you?
What do you mean it doesn't? A layer 2 that only does refactoring, it's exactly the same as layer 1.
It's not exactly the same. It adds formalisms. It adds an and. Layer 2 has the concept of an
talking
and.
about, I'm talking an example that doesn't add formalisms. An example
Here you're
that
talking
doesn't
about
add
2
formalisms.
different layer 2s.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Yeah, I'm talking about a layer 2 that doesn't add any formalisms.
Yes.
All it does is let you refactor.
Yeah.
So it lets you
Then only layer
hide
1,
stuff
course.
from the base layer, you mean?
That's the difference between history and state. There's a difference between log and state. Sure. We need both.
So it allows you to hide stuff, yeah? Then what's the problem?
There's
It's a curated subset of layer 1.
Yeah.
No, it's not just a subset, because it may...
At that point, if that's all you do, that's what it is. It's a curated subset of layer 1.
But if you add links, are you saying that the added links
they must
layer 2
exist
are
in
also
layer 1?
automatically
Yes.
added to layer 1?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also
saying that.
added claims as well.
Yes, I'm saying that. That's part of the spec. Yes.
Okay.
That's how you maintain.
And that's why it
equivalence.
has to be a clear subset.
Correct.
Okay.
That's the difference between.
So yeah, then it's
and state.
basically just the raw. Then it's just the raw data that the.
If it's a curated subset, there's no point in
Everything
having a
else points
second
to,
layer.
right?
It's simply you don't pull in all data and you reuse the same layer. But the whole point, of course, is that you add formalisms on top of layer 1 that aren't present in.
We could call that layer 3 if we want.
Well, that's what I'm getting at is, looking at this exercise, and we call the formal stuff on layer 3. I'm trying to analyze if there's a point of having a layer 1 and a layer 2, or we just have the layer 2.
There are 2 views of the same data
the
structure.
layer 1 the historical, it's a temporal history.
It's the log.
Because
the
the question is, do you want, let's say you remove a link because you restructured into, this is the most relevant place for this argument. Okay, you restructure that, you moved a previous link and moved it over to another place. Okay. On the layer 2, people are going to come in and they're just going to be, huh?
So
I understand it's impossible with base layer.
Yeah.
Right. So people come in layer 2 and they're debating with the, with the view of they don't see that link that was removed and they're going. Somebody comes in and starts debating or against that link that was on layer 1, saying, well, this isn't very relevant.
Which I would argue is the correct way to remove that link in the first place on layer 2.
No, suppose it's already removed and somebody argues against it now because they have
exactly.
historical.
The question is,
yeah, that's valid.
Is that old link providing a benefit of letting people still debate something?
Yes.
As I said, I think
or is it wasting their time? Is it a waste of time? Is my real question.
It's not a waste of time. Maybe
I think it's a waste of time.
No, it's not. It could have been removed because, okay, we have reason to believe this link is false. And now later on, somebody says, no, actually, here's a new argument why it could be true.
Exactly. That's
not
a
a waste of
disagreement
time.
in curation, exactly, and that's the purpose of a base
Right.
layer, is you still allow that discussion to happen.
Yeah.
And you can hide it if you want in layer 2, but the point is people can still retrieve it if they disagree with layer 2 and go to base layer 1. That's the whole purpose. And yes, it's less readable because there's more attack vectors, if you will, but that's also the point.
Yeah,
It
I'm totally
centralizes
getting the whole
disagreement.
thing.
Well, is it centralizing or adding disagreement, leaving disagreement to be more disagreed on, right?
I think that's the UX problem, and that's why I'm saying if you can clearly, well, first of all, we don't know until we build it, but as long as it's clear what I mean by that, I think we achieved a lot already. And yet it's a different use case. I also believe in a highly curated view where you don't show these combating arguments that lead nowhere is the last effort, and it actually has been shown in studies that that's part of the problem with misinformation. It's better if you don't counter arguments that you know are brought up for no reason. It's better to have a curated view that only shows the relevant, correct, valid arguments. So layer 2 definitely has to be there. That's never been the point, but everything should be falsifiable fundamentally, and that's my goal of a base layer. And if you can map curation in layer 2 as adding support and oppose on the base layer, that's a win-win. And then you can choose on layer 2 whether or not you show those or not. You can hide them, right? You can say they're there, but they're not enough people agree with them, or there's not enough activity. Or you can come up with mechanisms like what makes you decide to show them or not on a layer 2 once they become relevant.
Question probably, I don't know if that can be answered, but does everything that's been added to the base layer, is it automatically added to layer 2? Does it automatically show up?
Well, that depends whether layer 2 supports it or not and what the formalizations of layer 2 are. Layer 2 chooses is the answer.
Well, in the case that you
I
removed
would-
a link and it was argued attached to the link you removed, it probably wouldn't show up, right?
And this is where we can be smart. I mean, I for example, Felix, to come back to your moderation things, you said, you know, something gets more cast in stone if it's not being attacked for a while. So suppose I attack a link, I could say nobody counterattacks my attacks or support the link. Okay, the link is gone and my attack is gone because it's not relevant anymore. From view, that is, not from data. After a while, but we can keep the attack for n number of days. And if you know, nobody disagrees, okay, this is again a view concern. It's a community agreement. Like we have to agree as a community that this is the mechanism we want to use. Blah blah blah. I'm not saying this is automatic, but I'm saying the community can choose a certain view spec where something that's been attacked for n days without further support disappears.
Maybe you can even look at the base layer as the meta page of Wikipedia and the Wikipedia article, the layer 2. Almost.
Almost. I see what you're saying.
It serves a similar purpose in that sense. It should serve.
Like the 4chan of argumentation.
Yeah.
I have to stop now, but
Yeah, same here.
I hope it was worthwhile. It was to me at least.
It was, yeah.
Same.
Thank you. I got a much better understanding now.
Okay,
What you
that's
mean
nice
with the
to hear.
base layer.
And then we just need to try to name these things consistently in the future.
Yes.
I think we're almost at a point where we can write something up as well. I don't think Timothy should do that alone. But let's start.
Yeah, I'm like, for me, this whole thing went in a circle, and I unfortunately didn't get anything out of it.
Okay.
You know, what I found is, you know, the places that we agree on. What I found is I haven't found exactly where we disagree. I think where we disagree is why we even need a layer 2, because a lot of what you're saying I totally agree with, and it's what I've been envisioning from the beginning. It's just that we conceive of it differently in terms of, you know, I see, it goes back to that original thing we're talking about, where I feel like, why do you want to leave around that piece of junk claim that nobody should be wasting their time on anymore when we've made something better? It's that same question over and over again.
So I have an idea.
Because I want to keep everything for historical reasons.
I know, but you can do that. You keep it for historical
map.
reasons, and yeah.
I'm going to write up a story map of the use case that I envision that a base layer supports that I don't see if you remove it, and then we can maybe go from there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the real problem, just to close this off for me, the real problem is, I think the difference is we have to see it in practice. It's fears of things that could happen, and we're only going to actually resolve this when we try out different things.
Yeah, and that's why I want to write this the story thing, like just a story narrative that explains the use case I envision is the closest we can get right now to seeing it in practice. That's why I suggested that. So I'm going to try to put some time aside to make it more visual to you, hopefully, because I think I understand what you don't see that I see better. Okay, see you on Tuesday.
Yep, see you on Tuesday, guys.
Have a good weekend.
Yeah,
You
you
too.
too. Thank you.